A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on the Great American Road Trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke as my mum had only been a long-haul truck driver. I suggested that we saved a ton of money by sleeping in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We brought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill, cutting up one of them to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we'd actually gotten so good at setting up camp that we could do so in about 10 minutes. Luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites and rest areas, basically anywhere that seemed semi-safe and legal. There was never a bad night. We always felt safe. That was until we went to Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule and would never drive more than 3 hours a day. No destination in mind really. We'd drive to places that we had found the night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers. We'd actually gotten very good at making friends upon all of this. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite. We went in the back of their pickup. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us how to line dance at a country bar. Played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm. Got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them. Spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us as their own. So basically, every encounter that we had was positive. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked, and 2 cars further up. We pulled up near the RV, and a man opened the door. Tev waved hello, and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she had said something, he just slowly closed the door and stared at us. We figured that maybe he just wanted some privacy, so we pulled further down the road and found a place that we could stop at and parked our car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while it is still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing. While doing so, Tez pointed out a campsite further down and we decided to give it a go. We'd met so many cool people in our previous 5 weeks by going up and just offering a beer or chatting. We wandered over. Near the campfire were 2 men, the owners of the cars we had seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking and we sat down and had a beer. While talking, the guy seemed pretty off. We come to find out that the 2 of them didn't actually know each other. The older man was definitely on drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs. However, he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former ranger for the park. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, family, etc. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him, and he pulled out his camera to show her photos. It was very close to our campsite, and we were both a little freaked out. It was obvious we were scared by our facial expressions. The ranger laughed as he said this, and his expression also changed. It's hard to describe, but his voice was cold now. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should worry about." I was sure that he was only messing around with us. Yeah, he's gonna laugh soon, I thought, but he never did. I awkwardly laughed and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes, the ranger come back to it and was talking about something grabbing us in the middle of the night. No matter how we steered the conversation, it would always go back. The older man was high as a kite at this point and staring into the stars, not talking. We'd just laugh awkwardly, or try and sip our beer and get conversation to go somewhere else. The ranger then stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. It was pitch black out. I couldn't see anything outside of the circle of the fire. The beer cooler was just outside of that. Now suddenly, there's a red dot in the darkness. It took me a moment to realise that it's a camera. The ranger's now holding a camera. He's taking photos of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera light up. Now it wasn't entirely weird for people to take photos with us, but not of us. This is an entirely new thing, especially without asking or indicating that they're about to do so. So we're both staring at him like a deer in the headlights at this point. Instead of him realising what he's doing is weird, he just adjusts the camera and takes another photo, this time without the flash on, not asking us to smile or pose or anything, no explanation. After this photo, he comes back to the fire and sits down, not a word said about the camera. At this point we're both really scared. We make some BS excuse that we needed to go to our campsite and nope the hell out of there. We stand to leave. The UFO guy smiles and says, "Have a good night." Ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and says, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in these woods." Honestly, this made all of the hairs on my body stand on end. We then go towards our car. We rush over there, which we only found in the dark by the referencing of the RV. We jump in the front seats. My friend is hyperventilating. "Why'd he take photos of us?" I was shaking and responded, "I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She then stares at me and locks the doors. She turns on the headlights, but I tell her not to, and she turns them off, because this is how he's going to know exactly where our car is. God knows why, but we didn't set up camp this night. Thank God we didn't. So all we had to do is put it into drive and floor it out of there. Just as we turn onto the dirt road, we can see the ranger in the rear view. He's staring at us with a really angry expression and cold look. We floored it out of there and luckily never saw him again.
So, over the past couple of years, I've shared this story at many a party, dinners, etc. And one of my friends recently told me about this subreddit and encouraged me to share it, so here it is. September 2010, my boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We'd had a fantastic time, staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We'd stopped in a B&B for the night about half the way home and were planning to get home by 6 PM. We all woke up early, about 4 or 5 maybe, ready to set off again when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me and I'd had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled it in, the more desolate surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone back from stone to dirt. Around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough my boyfriend pointed out in the front to a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to a cafe and car spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest and all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with CAF spray painted on the roof, a cavern and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up front. The sun was up, but no light or people were around. I guess they were still sleeping. It was about 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile and I had a fumble through, looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be at least a decade-old mirror and suggested we take it and go, but me, being stupid sincere me, insisted we have to give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door and at first looked pissed off and tired. Then he smiled to me a tutu smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, then, seeing the boys approach, asked what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought was fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs, and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry and told me to come in, that women are the best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I don't want to come in. Ian muttered something, and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly, as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like how old we were, and where we were from, etc., and then became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both what we'd like to do to each other, how often we have intercourse, and weird, private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men meant to be fixing on the wing mirror, with his hand in the back window, grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off to the patio. Tony ran in after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car, and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying it must have felt. I got in the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in, and told her some nails were on the floor. We looked over and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tyre, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts from. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and were ready to go, when Tony was the last to get in the car. He closed the backseat door. As we looked back, we saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, running towards us. My vision adjusted when we got a bit closer, and then I realised he was holding a rifle, a hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway, getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take the train instead. I'm still terrified I'll meet them again.
This takes place in October 1977, when my mum was 16. She ran away from her abusive home along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked all the way from Mass to California. Obviously this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mum's home life and past experiences, she didn't see any danger in running away from her past. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends in many truck drivers and other travellers. It wasn't until they reached California that this encounter happened. The hillside strangler, at first thought to be one assailant, ended up being 2 men who were caught and brought into justice for 10 murders. So my mum and Lisa ended up meeting these 2 guys who were super nice to them. They crashed at their place for a few days, partying. Nothing bad come out of it at this point. They told them that they're going to take them to the Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see the sights. Not being from the area, my mum had no idea that these were ridden with crime, especially considering that they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mum really wanted to see where all the movie stars lived, so eventually these guys take my mum and her friend to some dreary restaurant and bar and get them super drunk. It's also the first time my mum is introduced and tries coke. After these underage girls are now completely drunk and high, they split off into pairs and my mum's friend disappears with one of these guys. My mum is now hanging out with just the one guy. Then he suggests that they stand on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night. He then says that a car's gonna pull up and she has to get into it and direct the driver across the street to this parking lot. It isn't really until the first and only car pulls up and gets in that she realises that this guy is prostituting her out. Keep in mind, these guys have been nothing but kind and respectful to my mum and her friend these past few days. Sadly, this type of abuse isn't new to my mum. So she gets into the car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, he keeps driving straight. My mum explains that he's going the wrong way, so he started driving faster. My mum then moves towards the door, he locks it, hits her, and attempts to hold her down and drive at the same time. He tells her that she's not going anywhere. My mum knew in her head that she needed to get out of the car or she'd be dead, so in one swift move, she unlocks the door, tucks and rolls out of the car. His car screeches to a halt. She sees some bushes in front of her home. She runs and hides behind them. He turns the car around looking for her, creeping along the road. Where she's hiding in the bushes, she can see that he has a gun. As soon as the car crept by, she ran to the backyard. It was all fenced in. There was no other way out. She had to go back the way she come. By the time she crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw that his car had gone to the end of the road and was about to turn back. He then passes again, looking relatively in her direction. She's had enough now. She starts to edge out of the bushes to run, but she sees that he slams on his brakes. Confident that he's seen her now, she runs as fast as possible around the corner, but she could also hear the car, so she had to duck and hide behind some cars. As soon as he passes again, she booked it across the street, which took her to the parking lot. This was where they were originally supposed to meet at, and she sees her friend there. The creep did circle back again, but then she was with her friend and they were leaving the area. My mum and her friend quickly ditched those two idiots and did find a safer place to stay at. Shortly after this, my mum called back home and made it back safely. It wasn't until a long time later that she saw the two guys on the news and a story about a woman being murdered, and she recognised the murderer, dubbed the hillside strangler, as the man who picked her up that night. This happened about 2 years ago. It was the last and final private security gig that I've ever had. It also is what made me say screw it and join my dad up in the Pacific Northwest. So I worked out in Beverly Hills, California. I was a guard at a luxury community. The place was a creme de la creme. They had strict policies as far as security went. This still didn't stop the odd paparazzi or strange folk trying to get in, but more often than not, I would be able to cut them off. Now there was no less than 4 of us on patrol at any time. 2 at the guard shack watching the folks entering and 2 running a patrol cart. So one night, we're understaffed. It's just me and Big D. Big D was this huge guy who was a former bouncer and had been a bodyguard for some really famous people. He had to use the restroom, so he decided to go on patrol and run by the clubhouse to use the facility. So I'm chilling in the guard shack, which was actually a pretty nice little office where we had our phones hung up. Now, the only people that could call us were the residents or if somebody was calling from the clubhouse or the pool area. So I answer, and it's nothing but heavy breathing. I look to see who's calling. It's a clubhouse. I think it's D messing around. I tell him to stop this and hung up. A few minutes later, and I'm flipping through the manga. Phone rings again. Clubhouse. I answer it and tell D to finish and come over here quick. There's more heavy breathing and a raspy voice that says, "That's not nice, Nate." At this point I know that it's not D because I see him coming back in the golf cart. I'm now petrified of whoever is calling. The voice then does a creepy giggle and hangs up. I then quickly stand up and go and tell Big D what had happened, how the guy knows my name. Now he thought that I was only messing around with him because we often play jokes on each other, but he says that he's going to go check it out. I tell him that he better call our boss, but he rolls his eyes and tells me that he's going to come right back. Besides, he never got to use a restroom, so I go back into the shack and try and calm down. The phone rings again. I don't want to answer it, but I do. It's more heavy breathing. While this is happening, I see D return. He's as pale as a ghost. He tells us that he's in the restroom in the clubhouse and somebody comes in, and they literally just stand there and breathe really heavily. They get to the stall next to him, and as he's flushing, he looks up and some man's wearing a mask and covers his eyes and face and is just staring at him with this menacing grin. D quickly books us out of there. Our boss wrote it off as a teenager playing pranks on us and wouldn't call the cops for us either. He said it must have been a resident who knows my name as we do wear badges. I really wanted to quit that night, but the next weekend I'm at work and D is in the booth with me and we're both talking about the Lakers game when the phone rings. D answers and says it's for me. I take it thinking it would be best for me as I've answered before, and then there's nothing. I don't think too much of it, but then that horrible breathing starts again. I look at D and then the phone and I hang up. We told the other 2 guards to stay there and we take off to the clubhouse. We get there, it's quiet. We start going through the game room and the kitchen and we peek in both the bathrooms. Then we get radioed that one of the others saw a figure jumping over the wall. The walls are pretty high and it's creepy how whoever this is scaled it with no problem. We call the cops as we're supposed to if somebody gets in, and then we could sweep the area. Meanwhile, one of my co-workers finds a notebook outside of the clubhouse. It looks like it's fell out of somebody's pocket. It was one of those small lined notebooks with the pages that tear out. Inside was not only my full name, but written out the full name of every security officer that worked there and our home addresses. After learning this, I quit. I was making good money and I liked the co-workers, but this was just too much. Okay, for some background, I'm 24 from South Africa, and this occurred about 8 years ago. So the area that I live in is generally okay, but it's got its fair share of creeps and weird stuff in general. So my home is one home away from this really large park. It's really lackluster, only a tall slide and a pair of swings, the rest is just open fields. So I was walking to the local spa, and in order to get there, I had to cross the park. Now, I was used to seeing shoes and other random stuff lying around, but this time was different. I found 3 whole pairs of clothes, just lying there, looked like Cell had gone through the place. That kind of rattled me. I was only about 16 then. I decided to hurry past this area. I was getting bad vibes from it. I suddenly felt somebody grab onto my arm though. I was shocked. I whipped around and faced a really tall man staring me right in the face with this angry expression. I wasn't really intimidated, as I'm quite hefty, but given the circumstances, my heart started beating quick. This guy started ranting on me about a whole bunch of nonsense, and trying not to piss him off. I just agreed with everything that he said. I can remember the smell of drunk on his breath. One thing that he said to me really stood out was that he was Moses reincarnated, and I should do some weird things with him later. Alright, this is getting creepy. I decided I had enough. I thanked the man for his advice and started walking away. Not running though, because I didn't want to trigger him. So I'm about 50 meters away from him, and he starts running, trying to tackle me down. He gets me to the ground and starts screaming into my ear, "Wake up, wake up," scratching at my arm with these really long nails that I'd failed to notice before. He starts trying to bite my throat. He then started to break down into tears about how I tried to kill him and how that he was soon to die, then saying that I killed him. I'm practically dying of fear at the overall oddity of the situation. Somebody sees what's going on and rushes over to get the man off of me. He doesn't even put up a fight, just lies there crying until the police come and pick him up. I'm not sure what happened to him or why those clothes were there, or what could have happened to me. All I'm saying is that I'm glad I've never had to see him again since.
I wrote a couple of days ago about the creepy mime stalker. This is by no means the only creepy thing that has happened to me, and the more I thought about it today, the more I realised I have had over my fair share of scary encounters. Sooner or later I'll add them all, but the one I'm writing about now is far away from the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend with a psychotic alcoholic father. She didn't live with him. He lived in a remote little coastal town. Now and again, we would go together to visit him and stay the night. My relationship with him was creepy in itself, but that isn't the subject now. One night, when we were visiting, my friend and her dad had a drunken blow up, and he kicked us out of the house. It was about midnight. We had gotten a lift down, and didn't have a car. My friend's dad lived about 4 kilometers out of town, a huddle of 2 or 3 shops, by way of a dirt road. We started walking down the dirt road to the town, where there was a telephone booth. This was in the days before it was commonplace to have a mobile phone. I was going to call my folks, who lived about an hour and a half away, and see if they would come and get us. The whole way to town, my friend was drunkenly moaning and crying about her broken relationship with her father. and she hadn't let up by the time we got to the phone booth. She sat on the bench next to the phone while I woke my parents up. They agreed to come and get us, and I sat down on the bench for the long wait. Shortly after this, a van appeared and parked just behind the bench we were sitting on, maybe 5 meters away. There were 2 young men in the front seats, and they were looking at us. If that didn't make me nervous enough, the van door slid open, and I saw there were a number of young guys in the back. I don't remember how many, more than 2. The place where we were sitting was deserted. There were no houses nearby, just more road, no people, nowhere to run, no one driving by. It was a crappy middle of nowhere town. I stood up so I could see them better, and kept my eyes fixed on the van full of men, acutely aware of our vulnerability. What I saw is that they were looking back at us. They were talking amongst themselves, quietly at first. Then they started talking more and more loudly, and it became evident that they were deliberately talking loud enough for us to hear. They were talking about pulling us into the van and taking us somewhere to have intercourse with and murder us. I can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist of it. My whole body was not shaking, quaking with terror. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. I remember the face of one of them so clearly, I could draw it now. He was just sitting in the door of the van, looking at me with no expression, looking at me with dead eyes, looking at me like I was a thing. All this time, my drunk friend hadn't stopped sobbing to herself. Whether she knew the van was there or not, I couldn't say. I knew I had to tell her about the danger, but I was actually so full of terror I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. That was when the most incredible thing happened. My friend's father, he would never apologise to anyone in his life, he was the most awkward prick alive, appeared, drunk in his car. It's hard to describe how unlikely it was for him to do this. He could hold a grudge like no one you've ever met. He was such a stubborn guy. He and my friend had an emotional reunion. The whole time our eyes were fixed on the van. The men had stopped talking and were just watching us. "Let's go," I said. We got back in the car and started heading for my friend's dad's house. The van started up and began to follow us. I tried to explain to my friend's dad about the men, but he said, "I'll just slow down and they can pass." They slowed down to crawl behind us. Then they began to shout out the windows, screaming threats. They followed us all the way down that dirt road, and then all the way down the driveway of my friend's dad's house. They just sat in the van behind us, and we sat in the car, waiting to see what would happen. All of my dad's friends' neighbours were holiday homes, and no one was in that night. We knew that if a group of men decided to get out of the van and carry out their threats, we would get no help. After a very long time, the van backed out of the driveway and they left. My parents came in a panic to the house when they couldn't find us at the shops. My friend's dad hid in shame, and I went back to my family's house. I've been asked if I went to the police, but I can't remember. I don't think I did. It was a messed up time in my life. But that incident changed me forever, and I'm a very fearful person now, and very overprotective of my kids. And I don't want to change, because I'd rather be like this than accidentally trust one of those millions of psychos out there.
It was the summer of '97. I was 9 and scared of my own shadow, so this experience only furthered my fear of the world. My mum and I drove up from Revere and made to Bearbrook State Park in New Hampshire. My dad was going to drive up the next morning to meet us because he had work. So everything was going normal at the campsite. We set up the tent, built our fire, and all was well. It was then that we noticed the lone, greasy-haired man in the campsite connected to ours, who was continually running and leaping onto a wooden post. He then attempted to balance himself on one foot. He kept on doing this, over and over and over again. It was odd, but we figured that he was just some lonely cranky guy, and we had a good laugh at this. Now cut to the night time. It's absolute darkness if not for the campfire. My mum and I were sitting and roasting some marshmallows over the flames when we hear footsteps approaching from the other campsite. Out of the pines, the lone man stumbled onto our sight. He was ghastly and ragged in the firelight. I could tell my mum was tense. She asked the stranger what he needed. "Hey, I need your help in my campsite." We waited and didn't go on. My mum asked what help he needed, and the filthy man said, I locked the keys in my van. I need you to come over with me." He then looked at me and said, "Don't worry, kid. You stay here." I remember getting goosebumps at that. My mum said, "I don't know what you want, and I can't really help you." "You must have a spare hanger lying around somewhere," suggested the man. My mum didn't. The ghoulish man wouldn't let up. "Yeah, you must have a hanger here. Maybe you dropped one around the tent." My mum then told him that we did not have a coat hanger, and that my husband's going to be here soon. He can help you. He's a pretty strong guy. He then said, "Yeah, alright." The creep slurred his words a bit and struggled away into the darkness, but he returned again and said, "Well, if you find a hanger, come help me. I'll be here." And with that, the horrid man left. Now my mum and I barely slept that night. I felt her move at every sound outside of the tent. Looking back, my poor mum must have stayed up all night just worrying that a butcher knife was going to go through the wall of the tent. Nothing happened that night though. When we woke up the next morning, we could see that the lone man and his camper were gone. Later in the day, my mum explained, I ran over to her and watched as she picked up something from the ground besides our tent. She held it, staring at it, not speaking. It was a metal hanger. What's even more scary though is what I found out later. 4 dead females were found stuffed into metal barrels in Bear Brook State Park. I don't know if they're related, but God, it scares me thinking they might be even in the slightest. It's early November, cold, rainy, around midnight. My fiance and I are taking spontaneous late night drives. We typically start out on one of the main roads within our city and keep following it until we hit the next town. Sometimes our drives last for hours. The layout of my country and surrounding countries is a little bizarre. All of the cities and towns are isolated by large spreads of woods. I live in a relatively large college town, but half an hour in any direction can land you in the middle of nowhere on an unmarked gravel road. There's no villages around either, so it's pretty scary yet exciting. So it's midnight and we're nearly lost. My fiance Willa is on her phone trying to figure out where we are. We eventually find that we're on a mud path in a pit of country farmed by small towns that we've never heard of. There's no other cars on the road. It's rainy and misty, and the headlights on my car aren't doing a damn thing. There are strands of trees and bushes on either sides of the road. We're heading north. She then looks at her phone and tells me that we're going to cross 200 St W, which runs into Reich Road, which is a straight shot to Wenker. So we continue our way down the mud road, but we never find it. Normally, we enjoy these drives and have fun, but this time, we're really on edge. Will says that we should have found 200 Street W already and asked if we passed it without noticing. I asked nervously if we should turn around, but she doesn't think we can without backing into a ditch or tree. I'm driving a Mazda and it has an awfully wide turn. She's biting her nails as she's on Google Maps. 10 minutes past this and we eventually see a little black road snaking up a hill, branching off the road we're on. I hurriedly turn into it. It's very narrow, and twigs and branches are raking the doors and windows of the car. We complete the hill climb. We're now in the middle of a clearing with a home at the end of it. We're in the middle of the woods now. Willa doesn't miss a beat and starts hissing for me to turn around. Our headlights illuminate the property in front and it's in total disrepair. Trash everywhere. Really nasty and old looking. Every inch of the property looks like it's come out of a horror film. Willa points out little moving shadows and glowing spots around the yard. There's lots of different cats there and they're all staring at us. Maybe somebody is there. I almost pissed myself when a walnut-sized rock darts out of the bushes and against the windshield. It fractures the glass. Willa screams and grabs my arm. She's whimpering, Deanie, what is that? What's happening? The rain is pouring in the backstream, down the trees, over the house and across the pavement. Blood runs down my face now. After a few seconds, a man stumbles out from the bushes and weeds and he's carrying a shovel. He's swallowed in a big dirty navy coat and has a beard. The screen door to the home opens. All of the cats scatter. A tall, thin, spidery woman crawls out onto the porch. She has long, wild grey hair. She's just up high enough on the porch that the headlights don't reach her. She wipes her unusually dark hands on her skirt. I have no clue what's on her hands, but I remembered how observed she looked. She stares at us now. Willa is screaming and crying and slapping to lock the doors. I panic a bit and slam the car into reverse, rolling over cinder blocks and branches, and then screeching back down the road. After Willa stops crying and there's some distance between us and the home, I start to relax. Yet, when we get out of the woods and hit a long stretch of straight road, I realise that a car's following us. It must be them. I get a horrible feeling now. We're then pursued for nearly an hour, until we finally reach Flory and pull into a gas station with a few other people there. I watch and the car passes. It's the same nasty Chevy truck that we saw at the home. They had stalked us all the way to the next town. We wait until the truck disappears, which is clearly looking for us, and we quickly ask for directions. On our way home, I look in the rearview mirror constantly, terrified that they're going to come back for us. We eventually make it back early in the morning. My teeth don't stop chattering until I fall asleep.
So, I've just been reminiscing with a friend about our trip to San Francisco 3 years ago, and realised that this story belongs here. There were 3 of us, all 24 and female, in America for the first time. We went to a beer pong tournament organised by a hostel, and headed to a bar afterwards, with a bunch of people who grouped together. One guy seemed to know the area well, and suggested we move on to another street, which had a row of clubs on it. I forget the name now, but we'd met some guys the previous night who mentioned the same street, so it stuck in my head, thankfully. We ordered about 6 Ubers, and everyone jumped in. A solo guy who tagged along with the group ended up sharing with us, as the 3 of us didn't want to split up. He spoke to the driver before we got in, and waited for us to get in the back. He then proceeded, to our horror, to squeeze in the back seat with us. I don't know why the taxi driver let him do this. At this point, we laughed it off and told him to get in the front, but he said, "It's okay," and we started moving. After a while, I realised we were back by our hostel. This was weird, because I knew the area we were heading to was in the complete opposite direction. I asked the cab driver where we were going, and told him it should be on the X street. He said, that's not where he told me to go, and the creepy guy casually states that he was taking us back to his tent. We definitely did not want to go back to his tent. We told the driver this and asked him to take us where we wanted to go. Thankfully he complied. Even creepier, the guy laughs and says to the driver, "Think what we could do with these girls." At this point we stopped laughing and are quite scared. It didn't help that he was squashed in the back seat with us and had an arm around my friend. He carried on making creepy jokes, and a few minutes before we pulled up, he went straight in and tried to kiss my friend. She kindly told him to F off, and thankfully we arrived, so jumped out. We had no idea where on this street the original group were heading, but luckily a nice and normal guy we had been talking to was standing on the corner where we pulled up. He felt really bad when we told him and apologised for leaving us with him. The guy followed us to the next place and tried to talk to us again. He said he didn't understand why my friend was so angry and couldn't understand what we were saying. It's a strong accent. He eventually left. We dealt with the situation by doing what we do best and laughing about it. For the rest of the holiday, we called our hostel our tent. It's not until we look back that we realise what a dangerous situation we put ourselves into, and how worse it could have been if we'd gotten out of the cab in a strange place, or if we had an equally creepy driver.
Let me start by saying that all the women in my family are small and look younger than they are. My mum is 60 but looks 40. I'm 42 and look younger. My oldest daughter is 23. Now this story is about what happened when she was 13 but looks about 10 or 9. Now all this to say is that there is no way somebody would have looked at her and thought she was of legal age. So one day, my 3 kids are playing in the backyard. S, the oldest girl, was 13. B, younger girl, was 11, and G, my son, was 10. We lived in a very rural area, just a few houses in a row on both sides of the street. A few more scattered around, and the rest is farmland. There were 5 houses on my side that had an alley running between them, which dead-ended behind the 5th house. It was adjoined home by the last 3 houses, and just ran behind the other two across from the road to our garages and parking spaces. There was one more other home on the alley, and past that there was only farmland. The 5 homes on my side were all owned by families who'd been there for a long time. Now my kids are playing in the alley all the time. Since only 3 families ever had any reason to be on it, they knew to be slow for the kids. One of these days, a man in a white pickup drove to our alley. My kids recognised him as one of the brothers who was renting the home behind us. They never really spoken to him, just seen him in that yard, so they knew he lived there. He asked S, and only S, if she wanted to ride in the truck with him. She said no. All 3 of the kids left the alley and entered our fenced backyard. He really didn't get any hint though, and he started begging with S to come over to him. He was sitting in his truck and wanted to get a hug off her. At this point, all 3 kids ran inside to tell me what was going on. By the time I looked out there, he was long gone, and my husband come back and sat on the porch with a shotgun. At this point, my borough only had 3 cops working of a double-wide trailer. They're all old and of retirement age, so a few years later our force was dissolved and come under the country jurisdiction. I later told the police what had happened, but they said since he wasn't a threat and didn't actually do anything and left, they didn't have the manpower to respond to every little call. No one ever come. I only found out much later when I discovered the child abuse database for our state and looked up my area. I then found out that both of the brothers were actually on this list.